And I think Pakistan should also now be prepared, and Pakistan should seriously think of responding India on the media front as well. Pakistan should also...
Javed Saab, you're a journalist, and sometimes, you know, when I switch on the television, because I'm very fond of, especially during these COVID-19 days, most of the time I spend at home, other than my shows. So whenever I would put on any big channel, you would see Indian programs, you would see Indian tourism, you would see, you know, they're portraying India.
Because they're...
Exactly, but we are not at all. I mean, you switch on BBC or CNN, even the Indian oil,
we have to have a proper, planning and a proper policy. And I think we need
Whose job is it? Is it the ministry?
Ministry of Foreign Affairs and
information collectively.
Collectively. And they must respond India on this media front, which is so important. Social media platform could also be used to expose Indian designs against Pakistan. The traditional media is also very powerful media, and that could also be used, and all other forms of media to basically dispel the impression that Pakistan is a country which is sponsoring terrorism, which is responsible for unrest in this region. In fact, it is India which is the culprit, and we must expose India through the media, all forms of media.
I think it's a high time now, because this should have been done much earlier.
Much earlier.
So I think we've wasted a lot of time just to, please, I don't know who. But I think this is high time.
We must not appease India any longer.
We've been doing too much appeasing, sir. So when the government changes, Mia Saab is in power. Sorry to say, no, it's not because this is the government of PTI and I'm using this platform to say so, but let's know who your enemy is. Simple as that.
And we must neutralize our enemy, and we must dispel the impression that Pakistan is up to some mischief.
I think, sir, this third decade of the 21st century, I think is very important. It is going to change the entire globe, the way things are changing in the Middle East, or in the Far East, for that matter,
everywhere.
And overall, even in the United States of America. So just imagine the President Donald Trump got
in a big crisis.
Oh yeah, and European issues would also emerge soon, and they are there. But I think one has to place Pakistan in the right position, and we should do whatever is necessary, sir, to counter these sort of threats. Pleasure to
Thank you so much.
Have you, sir. Thank you so much for your time. And that's all we have for this hour. I'll see you inshallah tomorrow at 8. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.
Book is life. Book is hope. And book is light for the future.
Politics is not everybody's cup of tea. In Pakistan, politics has endless possibilities. Politics is the art of the possible. But we have got you covered. Debate. For in-depth analysis. And insight. Watch Politics Today every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday at 9:05 p.m. with me, Farrukh.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to PTV World News. I'm Shahzad Qayyum with the top stories of this hour. Prime Minister Imran Khan constitutes three-member committee to prepare proposals on broadsheet issue. Prime Minister Imran Khan says Modi's India stands exposed for its evil shenanigans. Now, security forces kill two terrorists in North Waziristan. Interior Minister Sheikh Rashid Ahmed says government will not create hurdles in opposition's protest. Well, that's all for the moment. For more details and live streaming, log on to our website world.ptv.com.pk. You can find us on Facebook page with the name of PTV World and follow us on Twitter at WorldPTV. Thanks a lot for watching and it's goodbye for now.
Passion for polo will be the highest on the world's highest polo ground. Chandur invites visitors to experience a traditional polo tournament between the teams of Chitral and Gilgit. The tournament is held on Chandur Pass, the highest polo ground in the world, at 3,700 meters above sea level. The first time a polo tournament took place on the Chandur Pass was in 1936. It is a place unique and exotic in itself, surrounded by some of the most spectacular mountain scenery in the world. The event marks the annual rivalry between the teams of Chitral and Gilgit. The polo tournament has some added attractions for the visitors: trout fishing at the nearby streams and lakes, and a festival of folk dances and music of northern Pakistan. The event in itself offers a fascinating insight into the lifestyle of the people of this region. Their culture and indigenous customs are a delight to behold for the visitors. Crystal clear lakes, snow-covered mountains, alpine flowers, and vast stretches of green grass are added attractions. Fairs and festivals of Pakistan.
Tent pegging is an equestrian sport practiced in many countries around the world. Wooden targets are placed on ground at a specific distance, and players wearing traditional dress and turban have to run their horses and try to hit the target and pick it up with the lance. Target missing is considered as a failure. Tent pegging is thought to have originated in the subcontinent. Historians say that mounted soldiers would gallop through enemy camps, removing the tent pegs with their lances and swords. They would be followed by more mounted soldiers who took advantage of the surprise and havoc caused by collapsed tents and a confused enemy. Today, tent pegging is practiced around the world, but it is especially popular in Australia, India, Israel, Oman, Pakistan, South Africa and the United Kingdom. The Olympic Council of Asia included tent pegging as an official sport in 1982, and the International Federation for Equestrian Sports recognized it as an official equestrian discipline in 2000.
Hello and welcome to Politics. Today I'm Farrukh Pitafi. Today we are going to talk about politics, but not of Pakistan. We are going to talk about another country which is very important in this region, and it seems that its politics usually revolves around attacking other countries or slandering other countries. I'm talking about India. India-Pakistan relations have never been comfortable. We know that. We have fought wars. Both the countries have fought the wars. But despite that, we haven't seen the kind of belligerence that we are seeing these days. Particularly Narendra Modi's government is a gift that keeps giving. Not only it is bad for the region's stability, but but when you look at the revelations that keep on piling on, you realize that it is bad for India itself. For example, recently we saw Arnab Goswami, this anchor who's supposed to be the most highest rated anchor in India. That gentleman was found guilty of cooking numbers with one of the dating agencies, and that is not all. Now we have seen a data dump of his WhatsApp messages to that gentleman whose name is Partho Das Gupta. And amazingly, it shows you a very strange kind of picture. Just to give you some kind of idea about what is going on, this is a discussion about Pulwama. Remember, during India's election campaign, there was a massive issue because Modi had to win, and at that time we kept on telling you that Pulwama and this war-mongering following Pulwama was basically meant to help him, help Narendra Modi win the elections, and there was no evidence. But now we see, and here's the conversation. Arnab Goswami is telling Pratho Das Gupta that something major will be done this time to Pakistan. The Pratho Das Gupta says, good. Pratho Das Gupta again says, it's good for a big man, Narendra Modi, in this season, that is election. And Pratho Das Gupta then also writes, he will sweep polls then. That means that if there is going to be an attack on Pakistan or something of the sort, it is going to help Narendra Modi win elections, and he will be able to sweep the elections. We saw that is exactly what happened. And then Arnab Goswami says, Pratho Das actually asks whether it is going to be a strike or bigger. And the answer is Arnab Goswami is bigger than a normal strike, and also on the same time something major on Kashmir. You know, later on Article 370 was also abolished. So the whole idea that I want to flag here is that the discussion actually shows you what kind of politics is being played. One anchor who's supposed to be objective and independent knows beforehand something is cooking and the government is planning it. Then the rating agency in charge also knows that this is about winning the elections, and he is actually taking side in this case. We are going to talk about India's this kind of machinations, this kind of manipulation, and I'm going to talk about another very important visit, that is Ajit Doval, India's NSA's visit to Afghanistan as well. It seems that India keeps on spoiling in Afghanistan, it keeps on spoiling in Pakistan as well, and it has been consistently exporting destabilizing ideologies to various countries. We are going to talk about all these matters and to help us understand what exactly is going on. We are joined by Ambassador Asif Durrani, a career diplomat, a senior political, international relations analyst. Thank you very much, sir, for being part of the program. Michael Kugelman also joins us, senior expert on the region. He is based in Washington, D.C. Let me ask you, Asif Durrani, sir, first of all, what exactly do you make of the details that are coming? Does it actually reinforce the things that we have been saying for quite some time, that India has become some kind of fascist actor in this region?
Thank you, Farrukh. I think in your introduction you have explained quite well what has been appearing in the media, and that is actually appearing in the Indian media. You cannot say that it has been, say, doctored by Pakistan or their analysts. So, one thing is very much clear, that Indians normally have been using Pakistan's bogey whenever they have had elections. And it has been true with the Congress also, but BJP government, they have always used Pakistan's bogey whenever elections were there. Even during 2014 elections, they used that, and Mr. Modi said that blood and water cannot flow together. So he was in fact threatening Pakistan, and with regard to what was happening in Indian occupied Kashmir. So, and now when you talk about Pulwama in 2019, so again, it was not surprising. At least I'm not surprised, because they have enacted these kind of machinations in the past. Chhattis Singh Pora incident, in fact, they killed the Sikhs themselves, and then they put the blame on Kashmiri, freedom fighters. So in this manner, I think this has been old Indian tactics, and they have done it. Now, what you are talking about, this TV anchor person, Nab Goswami and all that, that has to do more with their, winning of elections or in BJP's own politics within the country. But it has had ramifications for Pakistan because Indians, after the signing of the Simla agreement, for the first time, they breached the line of control in the darkness of the night, and they attacked Balakot. Pakistan responded within 24 hours during the broad daylight just to put across the message that if they want to be smart or if they want to push the things towards a war, then I think they will find Pakistan ready. But let's not talk about war. But yes, these machinations, as you have mentioned, these have been the hallmark of Indian polity, whether they were to win the elections or just to pressurize Pakistan. Yes, sir.
Ambassador sir, with your permission, let me bring in Michael Kugelman because I want to seek his help to actually explain what exactly is this psyche. Because Michael, you and I both have been arguing for peace process, that there should be some kind of thaw between India and Pakistan. And let's face it, this argument is actually always there is a setback to this argument whenever we see something similar to Pulwama or Balakot, and then this kind of leaks where one understands that all of this was meant to, and all of this brinkmanship was primarily meant to actually win an election. Do you see any hope in Pakistan-India relationship? This is one question. The second question that I have to ask you is regarding this psyche, because usually it is thought that the countries which are doing well are more generous. I mean, the US actually keeps on building bridges with other countries. There are umpteen others that keep on doing it. Why is it that in India, which is considerably richer than other countries in South Asia, hate sells so effectively?
So, thank you for having me as always, Farrukh. I think the short answer to your question is that the India-Pakistan relationship is at one of its lowest points in quite some time. And I think that both of these very different issues that we're talking about today, one, these WhatsApp transcripts involving Goswami, and the other, India's increasing outreach to Afghanistan, including the visit of the NSA to Afghanistan, both of these issues are going to poison the relationship even more than it already was. I think that's quite clear. I think that there is very little political will on either side, particularly on the Indian side, to try to extend an olive branch. I think that in New Delhi, I mean, the response would always be, well, we tried some years ago when Prime Minister Modi went to visit Pakistan and nothing good came of that. That's the Indian perspective. And of course, we know that the Pakistan perspective, I think that given what happened on August 6, 2019, or August 5, 2019, with the revocation of Article 370, I think that really made it very difficult to expect this relationship to have any type of easing of tensions. And certainly now, I think that if you want to talk about the second issue first, these increasing interactions between Afghan and Indian officials, we know that the relationship between Afghanistan and India is a very strong one, and it has been for quite some time. But given the moment, given that the U.S. drawdown is taking place, given that there's a peace process in place that Pakistan has been involved in, but India has not, given that you start to mention names like the Indian National Security Advisor, does not attract much support in Pakistan, I think that will really amp up the concern and the tension between both countries, and I think make many on the outside, like me, think, well, are we setting the stages for some type of future India-Pakistan proxy conflict?
Right,
As
and
a
that is also important. My other question was, what exactly is the psyche that might be feeding into all this hate in India? But let me bring in another guest. Dr. Raja Kaisar Ahmed joins us, expert on foreign affairs, especially has done a lot on the psyche of RSS or BJP. Raja Kaisar, thank you very much for being part of the program. Let me ask you, why is it, and this is a question I asked Michael Kugelman as well, why do you think that in affluent India, hate sells so readily? Why is it that its Prime Minister, in order to actually win the election again, has to stage all this drama around Balakot attack? And then he gets the desired results because of the war frenzy.
Well, thank you for in the first place. Your question is very pertinent because the fact of the matter is that it is always ruling elite which sets up the priorities for a state, and particularly for a nation state in this paradigm in which we are living in. So BJP, it basically feeds on a divisive rhetoric. It feeds on communal politics. It feeds on a hatred which they have cultivated over the decades and which lies there in their ruling ideology. So when you have in place a prime minister who is convicted or who is having a proven involvement in the massacre of around 5,000 Muslims, the one who was accused of harboring terrorists, the one whose entry was banned into major capitals of the world. So these all stand as the undeniable and irrefutable realities. This is not what Farrukh, you and myself are uttering, but rather they stand as the concrete and substantive realities. So when this ideology has taken the guard within India,
what you're saying.
So they have reshaped the contours of state.
Narendra Modi, one can understand that is who he is. My concern then is that we keep on cutting India a lot of slack, that India, despite whatever it has in political dispensation, is a pluralist society, that it doesn't actually feed on hate, that all these tactics will fall apart. They seem to actually stand exposed, these claims, right? The fact is that Narendra Modi actually indulges in brinkmanship just to win an election, and he manages to sweep the elections. And the people like Arnab Goswami, even if they cook numbers, dating numbers, still they are viable television personalities because they keep on selling hate. So what does it tell you about India?
Yeah, well, Farrukh, as you were earlier pointing out, the pluralist and the secular India, it is a bygone story. India used to be secular and pluralist. India is no more secular and pluralist. And well, in the first wave of his ruling dispensation, in the first wave from 2014 till 2019, Modi has cultivated a soft phase of Hindutva. Where he has actually created an ambience and an environment in which, everything, those binaries, they were characterized, and those binaries were defined, whether you are anti-national, whether you are pro-national, whether you are anti-BJP, you are pro-BJP. They created some very paradoxical boundaries and binaries. And then, they came up with their second tenure, where they actually, this situation was quite rife for their rhetoric. And then they came up with their ferocious and the hard phase of Hindutva, which you can see, whose manifestation is the illegal revocation of the Article 370, outright quashment of this Citizenship Amendment Act. And then you see that very recently they have ushered an onslaught against the farmers because they also come from one another religious minority. So this is presently, India is at loggerheads with all of its minorities. And the kind of secular India which you are talking about, India has made an outright rupture. They have made a point of departure from that. And now, they are spearheading India's trajectory to a myopic Hindu polity, a Hindu Rashtra which they want to execute,
not
and
myopic
a kind
Hindu
of
policies,
mentality and
Hindutva
a kind of,
policies. Yeah. Let us actually draw this distinction. Religions are inert. We are talking about a politically weaponized ideology, interpretation of a religion. Let me go back to Ambassador Asad Dutani Saab, and Raja Kaisar, do stay with us. I'm going to come back to you. Ambassador Asad Dutani, Pakistan has actually produced a dossier with all the evidences that were needed to actually show to the world that India is indulging in destabilizing activities within Pakistan and within the region as well. It is a country that keeps on confronting or destabilizing other countries as well. For example, Nepal, Sri Lanka, even Bangladesh, that used to be very close, seems wary of Narendra Modi's policies. Why is it that the world is not taking note, sir?
Well, its short answer is it is India's size, its economy, it's basically the trade which India offers, and that's how the countries they trade. And the kind of human rights violations which have taken place in India, had this been any other country, Iran or for that matter, I think then they would have, the world would have made hell. So I think it's a hypocritical world. Let's face it, and that's how India goes scot-free, whatever they have done. So with regard to dossier, I think that's the building block. Now the narrative which you now see in India, especially after this Indian chronicles which have come up with these leaks done by the EU in Polik. That is now in fact proving Pakistan's point that what India has been up to. Unfortunately, India being a country in South Asia, they should have played the role of a leader, but somehow they are only big. They are not great at the moment. I'm sorry, I hate to use such terminologies, but the problem is the way they have been dealing with issues with their small neighbors. Forget about Pakistan. Pakistan has been giving them perhaps would not accept their dictates. But smaller countries, they have been playing with those countries. Look at Nepal and look at Sri Lanka, how they in fact promoted LTTE, how they supported that LTTE, how they sent their so-called Indian peacekeeping forces in Sri Lanka, and how they had to retreat. And it cost them, the life of former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. So in that manner, I think there are, proofs out there. But why India's narrative, why India has not been, blamed or shamed for that matter? I told you, it is.
Right. Michael Kugelman, I understand that maybe you're not going to agree with me when this policy of, turning a deaf ear to whatever India is doing might be considered appeasement. But here's a big question that I have to ask you. We have seen what Narendra Modi's two governments have been capable of. First, demonetization. One fine morning, they decide that 84% of legal tender means nothing, and it creates a lot of suffering for the people. Then we have seen CAA, we have seen annexation or de-annexation of Kashmir as well, confrontation with this country or that country, and then this kind of brinkmanship that you have witnessed, at least as per Arnab Goswami leaks. The question right now is that a lot of human rights violations are taking place in India, and then I read one of your articles in which you have pointed out that one shouldn't be expecting too much regarding human rights in the region from Biden administration right now. What is the bridge too far in this case? how many people or how many countries India annoys or alienates, then the world actually starts reacting.
So first, I would say I do think that there has been a fair amount of pushback against India from the media, from the international media, and certainly from international human rights organizations. I think we've seen a pretty significant upsurge in that since the Article 370 repeal. I think that's been quite clear. And what I often
human rights activists, media, not executive, not the government.
Right. Yeah. Say that that's a contrast from the fact that you haven't had governments who are willing to call out India. And we're talking about pretty much the world on the whole. We're not talking about only the West. We're talking about a number of the Muslim majority countries, the Arab Gulf states that have been fairly tepid in their responses to what India has been doing to its Muslim community, especially in Kashmir. And I think that gets to what Ambassador Durrani said before, that India gets a pass because it's seen as an important country, an important market, an important strategic player. In terms of your question of, what would be the threshold, what would be the red line, what might cause the world to change the way in which it looks at India in this context, go back to something that I think I said in your show before. If India were to actually stage some type of provocation, some type of military action, in Pakistan-administered Kashmir, if it were to follow up on the threats that it's been making a lot of over the last few years, I think there you'd get a very strong, harsh, critical response from the U.S. and other key countries in the West. So in other words, you'd have to have a situation play out where India would be acting in a way that would come across as that it's not a status quo power anymore. But in terms of just the reality of rampant human rights violations in India, the oppression of the Muslim Kashmiri Muslims, I don't really think that you're going to get much tremendous amount of pushback in Washington, and especially since what happened on January 6th, which I know you followed so closely, Farrukh. The question is, would this Biden administration, even if it separates itself and distances itself from the policies of the Trump administration, would it want to be going around the world calling out countries for their human rights violations and their democracy problems, given what played out in the U.S., which really was the biggest threat to U.S. democracy in a number of years? That's an open question. I don't know, but I do think that for Pakistan...
Hang on. I want to actually zero in on this argument that whatever happened in Washington or the attack on the U.S. Capitol somehow undermines U.S. capacity to actually argue for the human rights or, for that matter, democracy. The U.S. On the whole actually stood up for democracy, right? The U.S. Capitol was attacked. Anybody could have, a few thousand people could have attacked it. But on the whole, American media, American politicians, American institutions all stood up for democracy. And in comparison, when you look at India, the Supreme Court keeps on rubber stamping every decision that the Modi government actually makes. And then we have seen the media is also compromised. We have seen civil society doesn't have any voice. Opposition seems to have disappeared. So do you think that it is really a justifiable comparison between the two countries?
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to make a comparison between the two countries. My point is that if the Biden administration, at least initially, would feel uncomfortable trying to play the democracy promotion game overseas, given the problems that it's inheriting in its own backyard at home. And we've seen that the Biden administration has released a plan for what it's going to do in its first 10 days, and it's all focused on domestic policy. And I would think that really over the first 3 to 6 months, or maybe more, of the Biden administration, the priority will be at home, less so than foreign policy. And in that regard, the issue of India's excesses and its rights violations, I don't see that ranking all that high, to be quite honest. But certainly, I think that what you would probably get eventually from the Biden administration is a position of, well, we need to work with the world together to strengthen democracy at home in the United States and abroad in other countries. But then that gets to the issue of how far would the Biden administration be willing to go with upgrading a key strategic partner. And I think that this administration, like other U.S. administrations, will be selective in who it calls out and who it does not when it comes to the rights issues. It's always going to be more willing to call out those that are rivals or not perceived strategic partners.
Right. My question basically was about moral authority, and you have answered it. I think that regardless of what happened at the U.S. Capitol, it seems that the U.S. still retains the moral authority because it is fighting for democracy at home as well. Let me bring in, once again, go back to Raja Kassar. Dr. Raja Kassar, we are talking about the Indian policies for the region. And the question that I asked both of my other guests regarding the international reaction. But you have seen the dossier that Pakistan released. You have seen the kind of admissions that keep on coming from the other side of the border. Do you see any moment where it will be observed and there will be a serious reaction from the world governments, not merely their parliaments or standing committees or for that matter media or human rights organizations? Michael Kugelman actually brings up a very interesting point. He says that if India is perceived as a revisionist power, then perhaps there will be an outcry. And we have seen that India has tried to actually claim two things. One, surgical strike, and then the other strike, Balakot strike as well. So that seems that they have violated all the norms of international law as well. And despite that, we haven't seen that kind of reaction at all.
Yeah, well, Farrukh, there are two parts of my reply to your specific question. One thing, that India's position over all the issues you stated, they are not consistent with international law. They have violated and undermined the territorial sovereignty of a country, and they have publicly admitted that. Then they have been found harboring terrorism and doing subversive activities in Pakistan. Kulbhushan Jadhav is a glaring example of this phenomena. Apart from that, the kind of dossier which Pakistan has presented to the rest of the world, and very recently the kind of nefarious network which has been unearthed by EU Disinfo Lab, it in itself speaks volume of the kind of illegality India was committing. So if the world would have taken it seriously, perhaps by now there would have been some very serious reaction, because for that matter, if it would have been China or Russia, so there would have been more outcry, there have been more hue and cry by now. But since it is India, and India is subject to a preferential treatment at global level for all the geostrategic obvious reasons, so that's why we are not coming across that
geostrategic,
kind of...
Raja Kassar, geostrategic or geoeconomic?
Geostrategic, as you know, India as a potential counterweight to China, and then geoeconomic as well, because India happens to enjoy a very robust economic clout. So that is why, I remember once, NDTV editor, he quoted saying that, if the rest of the world would gauge India into a moral pretext, so then they would not be able to do trade with India. So that is a kind of a catch-22 situation, where the world, despite all the illegalities, and you see, Farrukh, the kind of parochial polity which India is getting into in the past 4 years, it is far-fetched, because India has right now changed even the basic notion of nationality from civic to ethnic. So even then the world
not only ethnic, actually, but it is also casteist, especially when you look at the way they keep on introducing Brahmanism into every picture. But Raja Kassar, I'm going to come back to you. Let me welcome another guest who joins us on telephone. Rahimullah Yousafzai Saab is perhaps Pakistan's best known expert on Afghanistan and tribal areas as well. Rahimullah Yousafzai Saab, thank you very much for being part of the program. Let me ask you one very serious question. Recently, we have seen that Ajit Doval actually visited Afghanistan. Can you actually give us some context why he was there? Because the understanding was that Pakistan, the US, and Afghan government unitedly actually are trying to build peace in Afghanistan. And India hardly had any say, or Pakistan kept on consulting it indirectly but didn't engage them directly. What do you think was the overall, focus of that visit, sir?
This visit actually, was sort of a secret. It was only announced when Ajit Doval reached Kabul, so it was not really planned like that. Also, whenever there is some important engagement, say, between Pakistan and Afghanistan, or if there is some big attack in Afghanistan, then we have seen that Ajit Doval has been rushing to Kabul. He has been consulting the Afghan government. They also invite Afghan officials frequently to India. So they have a lot of engagement. And, the Indian government also wants to update its knowledge regarding the peace process. I think it doesn't really want to support the peace talks with Taliban, but it has to do this because the Afghan government actually has been seeking peace talks with Taliban, and the US also has made a deal with Taliban. So if India now opposes the peace talks, it will look odd. It will be the odd man out, because every other country is supporting the peace process. So I think this would be to know more about the peace talks and to then fine-tune the Indian policy regarding the future.
Right. Regarding this overall attitude of India to actually go on a listening mission, let me ask you, there is this impression that India very quickly under Narendra Modi gets very insecure about its own interest in various regions. Do you think that there is a possibility that India is at this moment feeling insecure? And that's why Ajit Doval had to go there to make sure that their investment is safe in Afghanistan, sir?
Yes, I think India has invested heavily in Afghanistan in terms of military assistance and also, economic assistance. So the economic assistance is about $3 billion, but the defense expenditure is not enough. India has provided some weapons, gunship helicopters. It is also training Afghan army officers and police officers and even the foreign ministry officials in India. So they have a lot of stakes in Afghanistan. They don't want to be left out. They want to know as to what is going to happen in future. They may also be offering more, defense cooperation to Afghanistan because right now, as we have seen, there are almost daily attacks against the Afghan forces. So I think that it is also aimed at seeking the trust of the Afghan government and to sympathize with them regarding all these, heavy attacks. It is feeling insecure that if the peace process succeeds, if the Taliban become part of the Afghan political system, so that new government or coalition government or interim government, that will not be as pro-India as the present one. And in fact, that government may be even pro-Pakistan.
So
Pakistan will get credit for the success of the peace talks.
Right.
So I think India does not want that, and that's why we keep saying that the Indian role is that of the spoiler.
Right, and we are going to actually keep on focusing on that. Rahimullah Yousafzai sir, thank you very much for your precious time. Let me come back to Ambassador Asif Turani. Ambassador sir, since we have started talking about Afghanistan, let me ask you, is there a possibility that at this moment India is actively trying to dissuade Kabul from being part of any negotiations or peace process? On the other side, we have seen this drawdown from the US side. Do you think that there is a possibility that India might actually offer some boots on ground as well?
Well, I think for that would be the luckiest day if Indian boots are on the ground. I don't think India will offer their boots on the ground. Yes, they may help the government there with the equipment, military equipment, which they already are doing. In terms of training, they already are doing. But I don't think And then India, I'm sure they are realists also. They have realized that they cannot push their point of view beyond a certain point. And they have, in fact, in Afghanistan diplomatically, but he is part of Ashraf Ghani's government. Not all, but a few, people. They are pro-Indians. There is no doubt about it. Their intelligence agency, yes, they are quite close to Indian intelligence agency RAW. They are collaborating. There is no doubt. So there are Afghan spoilers, and of course India is supporting them as a spoiler. They want to, I think, because unrest in Afghanistan suits India. If Afghanistan becomes stable, then Indian machinations in Afghanistan would not work. Their machinations against Pakistan would not work. So India is aware of that. But at the same time, India has a limit in Afghanistan, and I don't think they'll succeed. Yes, Farrukh.
Right. Let me ask Michael Kugelman, how is India's role in Afghanistan perceived? I understand that there are two concerns. On one side, we heard President Trump talking about Narendra Modi actually bragging about construction of a library, and while America keeps on putting all the bill in in Afghanistan. On the other side, Pakistan also has these misgivings about TTP and India nexus, and then a lot of TTP groups have actually reorganized themselves into ISK, and that is Islamic State or Daesh Khorasan. Do you think that these concerns are also flagged in the US, or they are not at all, and the US sees India's role in Afghanistan mostly as a constructive one?
Yeah, certainly the Washington's perception of India's role in Afghanistan is sharply at odds with Pakistan's perception. And clearly the Trump administration wanted India to be doing more than it already was, as you referenced. I think that what we could expect to see with the Biden administration, to the extent that the Biden administration is even involved in the Afghan peace process, is for India to be apprised, updated, consulted on what's going on. I think that there's a recognition that India cannot and will not play will not play a role in the peace process simply because of Pakistan's involvement as a facilitator. But certainly, I think that for Washington, the concern is that India will be, left out because there's no role for it in the peace process, and that could have implications that could lead to greater tensions between India and Pakistan, and we're seeing that now. The fact of the matter is that this visit of Doval to Afghanistan, that has to be seen in a broader context. Over the last few months, there have been a number of visits of senior Afghan political leaders to India. India has been left on the outside looking in this whole peace process in Afghanistan, and now it wants to get in on the game. I think it has read the writing on the wall that the U.S. is on the way out, and it wants to do what it can to ensure that it continues to have influence and access after the U.S. is out. But of course, the more India does to involve itself in Afghanistan, the more likely it could be.
Let me very quickly just let me add one thing that I heard, being a student of history and a reporter, a journalist. I kept on hearing that while the negotiations between Taliban and the U.S. went on, it was agreed that India will also be subsequently informed of what the agreements were, and it will be taken into confidence. And the U.S. has been taking India into confidence along with other regional partners. So if that is the case, India might be part of this process. Then why do we see that India might not be?
No, absolutely, you're right. I think that India has been consulted consulted by the Trump administration and will be by the Biden administration as well about what it feels India needs to know about where things are going. But let's be very clear. India has made significant amounts of investments in Afghanistan, mainly through economic and financial considerations, and it has had a pretty good relationship with Kabul, and particularly the Ghani government. And of course, there's concern in New Delhi, as there is in Kabul, that the Ghani government's power could soon be jeopardized if the peace process moves into a situation where there's an interim government, or if there's a peace deal where the Ghani would not have a role. This is concerning to India because it's a friend of Ghani. So I think this is why it's trying to get more involved, having discussions, deliberations with the Afghan government, just to try to get a sense as to what's going on, even though at the end of the day, India's hands are relatively tied. There's only so much it can do in this broader picture. It is not a player in the diplomatic process surrounding the peace and reconciliation process.
All right. You're right, but earlier you said that India sees itself as the friend of Ashraf Ghani, President of Afghanistan. I mean, Pakistan doesn't see itself as the enemy either. Ashraf Ghani has been very cordial with Pakistan too. Let me once more go back to Raja Kassar. Dr. Kassar, we are talking about this situation that might be emerging in coming days. Is there ever a possibility that India and Pakistan can work or agree to work together and ensure that their wars actually don't spill into Afghanistan at all?
Well, it does not it is not a possibility apparently coming to happen. Reason being, we have a very bellicose neighbor right now at our borders. And then there is a genocidal maniac who is sitting there as the Prime Minister of India. So, and with the BJP's ruling ideology as revisionist and, the kind of emerging regional realities which India wishes to create and India wishes to precipitate, it does not it does not come as a plausible equation right now. India has been trying to destabilize Pakistan through Afghanistan. It was a kind of a second war front India wanted to open against Pakistan because Pakistan was already confronting India on its eastern borders, and the orchestrating the same threat onto the Pakistan's western border was like simultaneously coping up with a single enemy at two fronts. So that didn't work out. And then, under Modi administration, India was hell-bent in isolating Pakistan from the mainstream and disenchanting Pakistan from its traditional and long-standing allies. So, given that mindset, which is right there prevalent in India, and a kind of non-accommodative posture at large, suspending all the talks, and then deciding all the matters unilaterally, even those which concern India and Pakistan together. So in that matrix, the cooperation it apparently seems next to impossible. But if there is a change of regime in India and we